Welcome, everyone, to Alternate History Podcast, where we do what history teachers hate most: imagine things that never happened. Today, we're playing the biggest game of strategic risk ever conceived. On one side, Alexander the Great, the Macedonian madman who wanted to conquer the entire world. On the other, warring states China, where 7 kingdoms were busy beating each other senseless. The question is, if Alexander decided to skip Greece and Rome and head east instead, could he have unified China? And more importantly, which route should he take? The overland route through deserts and mountains, or the sea route around the Indian Ocean? Spoiler alert! One of these routes will kill you horribly. The question is which type of death you prefer. Act 1. The opponents. First, let's see who we're talking about. In the left corner, Alexander the Great, 30 years old, fresh off demolishing the Persian Empire. He'd defeated Darius III, ruler of the largest empire in the world at that time, not once, but 3 times Issus, in 333 BC, Gaugamela in 331 BC, then chased Darius all the way into Bactria, Afghanistan, where his own generals assassinated him. Alexander built cities named Alexandria everywhere, like he was playing Monopoly Egypt. Check, Alexandria. There is now Egypt's second largest city. Persia? Check, Alexandria. Carmania? Alexandria. Ariana? Countless others. India? Check too, with the Battle of Hydaspes in 326 BC, though his troops complained so much he had to turn back. Alexander wasn't your average military genius. He was the kind of person who, upon seeing the Hindu Kush Mountains at 4,000 meters covered in year-round snow, didn't think, wow, that's too high, but rather, what's on the other side? When his generals said, "Sire, the troops are exhausted," he replied, "just a bit further." And that bit further lasted 10 years. His army? The pinnacle of ancient military art. The Macedonian phalanx, a legendary formation with sarissa spears 6 meters long, creating an impenetrable wall of spikes. The companion cavalry, heavy armored cavalry personally commanded by Alexander, fast as lightning, striking enemy flanks with surgical precision. Thessalian cavalry, Cretan archers, Thracian javelin throwers, a diverse force capable of countering any tactic. And most importantly, experience. This army had campaigned from Greece through Anatolia, down to Egypt, across Persia, up to Afghanistan, over to India. They fought in deserts, on mountains, across rivers, through forests. They'd never lost a major battle. They believed in Alexander like a god. In the right corner, warring states China, around 330 BC. This wasn't one country, but 7 kingdoms fighting each other: Qin, Zhao, Yan, Han, Wei, Chu, and Qi. Each had armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, not tens of thousands like Greece, hundreds of thousands. Qin, the militarily strongest state, had a warfare state system designed by Shangyang. Every farmer was a reserve soldier. Promotion was based on the number of enemy heads you collected. The more you beheaded, the higher you climbed. It was brutal, but incredibly effective. They had crossbowmen trained from age 10, shooting accurately at 80 to 100 meters with terrifying precision. They had war chariots, though less effective than before but still formidable. They had a road system and relay stations allowing rapid troop deployment. Zhao in the north specialized in cavalry. King Wuling of Zhao had reformed the army, forcing Huaxia soldiers to wear hu, nomadic, clothing, and learn horseback riding and archery. In the nomadic style, Zhao cavalry was trained to fight the Xiongnu, the nomadic cavalry that eventually forced all of China to build walls. If Alexander's phalanx was slow, Zhao cavalry would circle and shoot until the phalanx collapsed. Chu in the south was the superpower of population and resources, larger in area than the Persia Alexander had just conquered, largest population among the 7 states. They had their own culture, their own writing system, even their own religion. Fighting Chu was like fighting an entire empire, not just a state. And most importantly, they had numbers. China's population at this time was estimated at 35 to 45 million people. Alexander's entire empire from Greece to India? About 15 to 20 million. China was double in population. That meant double the troops, double the food, double the taxes. See the problem? Alexander was thinking about attacking a place twice the size of the empire he'd just conquered, with military technology no worse than his, with hundreds of years of warfare experience. So the question isn't, could Alexander win, but could Alexander survive? Specific military numbers. To help you understand the scale, let me give you numbers. Alexander's army at peak strength after conquering Persia. Original Macedonian troops, 30,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry. Greek allies, 20,000 men. Mercenaries and local Persian troops, 50,000 men. Total, about 100,000 to 120,000 at peak. But after the Indian campaign and the march back through Gadrosia Desert with 75% losses, only about 30,000 to 40,000 remained. Warring states' armies, Qin, the strongest, standing army, 600,000 men, according to strategies of the warring states, could mobilize 1 million men, actually deployed in major campaigns, 200,000 to 300,000. Zhao elite cavalry, 100,000 horsemen, infantry, 400,000 men, especially strong in mobile warfare. Chu, largest population, could mobilize 500,000 to 600,000 troops, occupied nearly half of China's territory at the time. See the disparity? Alexander with 40,000 men versus Qin with 300,000. That's a 1 to 7.5 ratio. This isn't a battle, this is collective suicide. Act 2. Option 1. The overland route via Central Asia. All right, so suppose Alexander drinks a bit too much wine one night and decides, you know what, Persia's boring, let's go to China. Which way does he go? Option 1, overland. Sounds simple, right? Just walk east. Oh, except you have to cross Afghanistan, traverse the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world, cross the Taklamakan Desert, whose name literally means you can enter but you can't leave, and then reach China. But this is actually the most viable option. I'm not kidding. Step 1, turn Bactria into a base. Bactria, modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, must become Alexander's new home. This is a fertile region with water, people, and most importantly, money. Without a solid rear base, you can't attack China outright. But Bactria wasn't easy to control. This was the land of nomadic tribes, the Scythians, the Sogdians, people who fought Alexander for 3 years, from 330 to 327 BC. They didn't fight with phalanx formations. They used guerrilla tactics, hit and run, ambush, burn supply depots, assassination. Alexander nearly died several times in these campaigns. But in the end, what did he do? He didn't just conquer through violence, he used politics. Alexander married Princess Roxana of Bactria in 327 BC, one of the most beautiful women in Asia, according to the historian Plutarch. This wasn't a love marriage, this was a political alliance. By marrying Roxana, Alexander turned Bactrian leaders from enemies into family. And in nomadic culture, family is everything. He also encouraged, actually forced, 10,000 Macedonian soldiers to marry Persian and Bactrian women. This was the famous mass marriage policy at Susa in 324 BC. Many Macedonian soldiers were furious because they already had wives back home, but Alexander didn't care. He understood that to control Bactria long-term, you needed to create a generation of Greco-Persian hybrids loyal to him, not to their local parents. To turn Bactria into a rear base for the Eastern campaign, Alexander needed to build cities. He'd already built at least 12 Alexandria cities in Central Asia, including Alexandria, Eshate, modern Kujand, the furthest Alexandria, on the border with the Scythian steppe. Each city wasn't just a military fortress, but a center of Hellenistic commerce and culture. He settled retired Macedonian soldiers, Greek merchants, and craftsmen there. Within one generation, these cities became hybrids of Greek and Central Asian culture. establish garrisons. He needed at least 50,000 troops garrisoned in Bactria to ensure security. That's not a small number, that's nearly half his forces, but without garrisons, Bactria would rebel the moment he turned his back. Create logistics networks. He needed to build granaries, horse stations, roads connecting the cities. Every 20 miles, a relay station with fresh horses, food and water. This system would later become the original Silk Road. Time needed at least 10 years. Alexander needed a decade to consolidate Bactria, train local troops, build infrastructure. This is the boring part, but the most crucial. Without this time, the China campaign was just a dream. And this is where actual history went wrong. Alexander wasn't patient enough. He wanted to conquer everything right now. He didn't wait 10 years. He didn't build a solid system. And that's why his empire collapsed right after he died. But in our alternate scenario, let's assume Alexander learned his lesson. He's patient. He spends 10 years consolidating Bactria. Now he's ready for the next step. Step 2. Conquer the Tarim Basin. From Bactria heading east, you reach the Tarim Basin, modern Xinjiang. There's the Taklamakan Desert in the middle, but surrounding it are oasis cities: Kashgar, Yarkand, Khotan, Kucha, Turpan. These oases would later become the Silk Road. But in 320 BC, this place was wilderness. The oases were controlled by small kingdoms, the Tocharians, the Saka, Indo-European tribes who'd migrated from the west. They spoke languages closer to Greek than Chinese. This is good news for Alexander. Why? Because they could be persuaded, bribed, or threatened more easily than the Chinese. Alexander didn't need to fight them. He just needed to make them afraid or greedy. Strategy for conquering Tarim. Kashgar, the first and most important oasis. Located at the foot of the Pamir Mountains, it's the gateway from Bactria to Central Asia. Control Kashgar and you control the entire route. Alexander needs to garrison at least 5,000 troops here, build fortresses, and appoint a loyal governor. But how to control the locals? Simple. Buy them off. Kashgar lived on trade. If Alexander promised to protect caravans, exempt taxes, and build rest stations, Kashgar merchants would support him. No fighting needed. Economics is a stronger weapon than swords. Khotan, the wealthiest oasis, famous for jade. Khotan supplied jade to all of Central Asia and China. Controlling Khotan meant controlling a huge revenue source Alexander needed to place advisors, actually spies, at the Khotan court, lend money to the Khotan king at high interest, and gradually turn Khotan into a vassal state rather than directly conquering it. This was the tactic Rome would use 300 years later, but Alexander could learn it first. Kucha and Turpan, two oases north of the Taklamakan Desert. This was a shorter but more dangerous route because it was close to the Mongolian steppe. Home of fierce nomadic tribes, Alexander needed to ally with these tribes or at least neutralize them. Best way? Pay them money and goods so they wouldn't raid his caravans. The biggest challenge, the Taklamakan Desert. Between the oases lies the Taklamakans, one of the deadliest places on Earth. Daytime temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius. Nighttime drops to -10. No water for 300 kilometers. Sandstorms could bury entire caravans in minutes. Even in the 20th century, people still died here. Marco Polo later wrote about this desert. When travelers go at night and one person falls behind, when they try to catch up with the group, they hear spirits talking to them, and these voices often lure them off the path. This wasn't spirits. This was hallucination from dehydration and exhaustion. Alexander had once marched through the Gedrosia Desert, Pakistan, in 325 BC and lost 75% of his troops. The Taklamakan was twice as harsh. If he tried to march directly across the desert instead of following the oases, it would be collective suicide. So the solution? Go stage by stage, rest at each oasis, store water and food, wait for cool season, October to March, and most importantly, hire local guides. Nobody knew the desert better than those who lived there. Time needed to control Tarim, 5 to 7 years. This wasn't a military campaign, but an economic and diplomatic campaign. Alexander needed to turn Tarim into allies, not colonies, because he didn't have enough troops to occupy each oasis by force. Total time from Bactria to China's border, 15 to 17 years. This was a long-term commitment. Not 5 or 6 years like conquering Persia. Alexander needed to shift his mindset from quick conquest to long-term occupation. Step 3. Knock on the door and meet Qin. And this is where things get interesting, or terrifying, depending on how you look at it. The moment Alexander steps through Hexi, modern Gansu, he encounters Qin. And this isn't Persia, folks. This is a military superpower that had been grinding 6 other states to dust over 100 years of warfare. Qin had standing army of hundreds of thousands. Legal system so strict it was terrifying. Beheading and public display was routine. Crossbowmen trained from childhood, shooting 80 meters with high accuracy. Logistics system allowing army deployment across the country in weeks. And especially, they'd been winning, always, continuously. Alexander's phalanx, great for fighting on open plains. But northwestern China was all mountains and valleys. Qin crossbowmen would shred the phalanx from distance before it got close. So what does Alexander do? Step 4. Play politics. This is when Alexander must use his brain instead of muscles. He can't fight Qin head-on, but what can he do? Ally with Qin's enemies. Remember, China had 7 warring states. Qin was the strongest, meaning the other 6 all feared Qin. Zhao, Yan, Chu, Qi all wanted someone to hit Qin for them. Alexander arrives at the perfect time. He could say, "Hey guys, I know you hate Qin. I do too. Let's attack it together." This is exactly the vertical and horizontal alliance tactic that warring states diplomats played constantly. But here's where we need reality. Alexander faces a huge barrier, language, and he doesn't speak ancient Chinese. His troops don't understand Chinese culture. How does he convince warring states' kingdoms to ally with a barbarian from the West? This is when Alexander needs to buy interpreters and diplomats. Fortunately, the warring states period had many traveling persuaders, orators who specialized in going from state to state, selling strategic advice to the highest bidder, Su Qin, Zhang Yi, Gongsun Yan. These were the diplomatic superstars of the time. Alexander needed to recruit these traveling persuaders, pay them gold, which he had plenty of from Persian treasures, and send them to the courts of Zhao, Yan, and Chu with this message: "There is an emperor from the West who has defeated the Persian Empire, a kingdom 3 times larger than Qin. He has powerful forces, tactics never before seen, and most importantly, he hates Qin because Qin blocks his path to the east. He wants to ally with you to destroy Qin together, then divide the land." This is half lie, half truth. Classic diplomatic art. Did Alexander really hate Qin? No, he'd never met them. But the warring states didn't need to know that. Reactions from the states, Zhao would be most interested. They bordered the west and north under the greatest pressure from Qin. If a strong ally from the west attacked Qin, Zhao's burden would lighten King Daoxiang of Zhao, 298 to 266 BC, was pragmatic. He'd assess, is this guy really strong? If so, we ally. If not, we kill him and take his gold. Alexander needed to prove his strength. Best way? Fight a show-off battle, attack a border mini-kingdom, annihilate it, so Zhao could see the power of the phalanx and companion cavalry. This is marketing through violence. Yan was farther away but also feared Qin. They were the weakest of the 7 powers. Allying with Alexander was a chance to survive. The problem was Yan had nothing to pay Alexander except land, which Alexander was trying to seize anyway. Chu in the south was the largest superpower but also the most confident. They might think, we don't need any ally, we'll fight Qin ourselves. But if Alexander promised to let Chu occupy all the south and central regions after Qin's collapse, Chu might agree not to interfere with Alexander. That's also a victory. three-front attack plan. If the alliance succeeded, Alexander could organize a three-front attack on Qin, Western Front. Alexander, with 50,000 Macedonian Bactrian Tarim troops advancing into Guangzhou via the Hexi corridor. Northern Front, Zhao with 100,000 cavalry attacking Hedong, Shaanxi. Eastern Front, Yan, Qi, Han, coalition, attacking from the east. Southern Front, Chu pressuring from the south. Qin, though strong, couldn't fight four fronts simultaneously. Qin forces would have to split, and that's when the Macedonian phalanx would shine. In direct confrontation on plains, the phalanx was invincible if not shot by crossbowmen from distance. But there's a problem. The warring states didn't trust each other. They'd betrayed each other dozens of times. Vertical alliances against Qin had failed many times because states always calculated, if other states fight Qin and weaken, I can swallow them. Alexander needed to ensure everyone attacked simultaneously. If only he fought Qin alone while other states watched, he'd die. So what did he need? A treaty with witnesses and punishment if anyone betrayed. He could propose whoever doesn't participate after Qin collapses gets no land and will be attacked by all other states. This is prisoner's dilemma tactics. If anyone betrays, everyone loses, so cooperation is best. Time needed to create alliance, 3 to 5 years. Diplomacy isn't fast, need multiple rounds of negotiation, many envoy missions, many demonstrations of goodwill, but if successful, this is the key to defeating Qin. Step 5. Crush Qin and seize Guangzhou. Suppose a miracle happens, the alliance succeeds, the three-front attack occurs. And after a brutal war lasting 5 to 10 years, yes, a full 5 to 10 years, not a few months, Qin is defeated. This would be the bloodiest war in ancient history. Hundreds of thousands dead each year. Economy collapses. Farmers abandon fields to become soldiers or flee plague outbreaks. This isn't a romantic Hollywood war, this is hell on earth. But finally, suppose Qin collapses. Alexander seizes Guangzhou, the Wei and Yellow River Plains, the center of Huaxia civilization. This is the most fertile, most defensible land, surrounded by mountains, with the deepest cultural significance. Whoever controls Guangzhou controls China. That's why Qin Shi Huang placed his capital at Xianyang. Alexander now stands in Xianyang. He is master of Guangzhou. He has defeated the military superpower, Qin. He is a hero in the eyes of Zhao, Yan, and Chu. But now he has a new problem. A problem Persia never had. He is an outsider. He isn't Huaxia. He doesn't speak Chinese, his troops don't understand Chinese culture. If he rules like a Macedonian, the Chinese will rebel within years. Why? Because the Chinese believe in mandate of heaven. The king must be chosen by heaven. If the king is foreign, barbaric, doesn't know rituals, doesn't worship ancestors, then he isn't a king, he's an occupier. And occupiers will be driven out sooner or later. So what must Alexander do? Learn and assimilate. Alexander was very good at this. In Egypt, he declared himself son of Amun, a legitimate pharaoh. Egyptians accepted because he performed rituals correctly and respected local gods. In Persia, he wore Persian clothing, performed proskynesis, kneeling, and called himself King of Kings according to Persian tradition. Macedonian soldiers hated this, but Persians loved him for it. In China, he needed to do the same, but much deeper, because Chinese culture wasn't just rituals. It was an entire system of philosophy, ethics, society. Steps Alexander needs to become son of heaven. 1. Learn Chinese. He needs to learn at least enough to communicate basically and perform rituals. This is difficult because ancient Chinese is completely different from Indo-European languages, but Alexander was very intelligent and tutored by Aristotle. He could learn. 2. Hire Confucian scholars. He needs Confucians as advisors and teachers. These scholars would teach him about Li, ritual, Ren, benevolence, Yi, righteousness. He needs to know how to behave like a Chinese gentleman, not a barbarian warrior. 3. Perform the heaven worship ritual. He needs to organize the Fengshan ceremony at Mount Tai, a ritual only the greatest kings were allowed to perform. This declares to the whole world, I am the son of heaven. Heaven has chosen me. If done correctly, the Chinese will accept him. If done wrong, they'll see him as a blasphemer. 4. Marry a Chinese princess. Again, Alexander needs to marry a princess or noblewoman from Qin, Zhao, or other states. This creates legitimate bloodline. His son will be Greco-Chinese hybrid, and that's the foundation for a new dynasty. 5. Keep Qin's prefecture counties system. Qin's administrative system was extremely efficient. Divide land into prefectures, prefectures into counties, each level with officials appointed by the center. Alexander doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, just change the king's name at the top. 6. Combine Qin law with Greek philosophy. Qin law was very harsh, cutting ears, severing feet, live burial was routine. Alexander could humanize it a bit by applying Aristotelian ideas of justice. This would make him popular with common people. 7. Combine Macedonian and Chinese armies. This is key. He can't rely only on 50,000 Macedonian soldiers. He needs to recruit and train local troops, but not as separate armies, but integrated. Each Macedonian phalanx has a Chinese crossbow unit. Each companion cavalry unit has Zhao cavalry. They train together, eat together, fight together. Within one generation, the line between Macedonian and Chinese will blur. 8. Build a new capital. Alexandria Sinica. Instead of using Qin's Xianyang, Alexander should build a new capital nearby. This capital would symbolize the new empire. Greek architecture mixed with Chinese Temple of Zeus beside Confucius Temple. Greek theatre and arena next to Chinese-style palace. This would be where East meets West. Time needed to assimilate, 10 to 15 years. This isn't a quick process. Alexander might not live long enough to see the empire stabilize, but if he lays the right foundation, his son can continue. Result, if successful, an empire stretching from Greece to China. A hybrid civilization between Greek, Persian, and Chinese. This would change human history. Imagine Plato and Aristotle's philosophy translated into Chinese, influencing Confucianism and Taoism. Euclidean mathematics combined with Chinese mathematics. Greek sculpture influencing Chinese sculpture, like Gandhara art later. Greek drama entering China. Babylonian Greek astronomy combined with Chinese astronomy. Sun Tzu's art of war translated into Greek, influencing Western tactics. But most importantly, trade. The Silk Road would open 300 years earlier. Trade between East and West would explode. Ideas, technology, goods would flow freely. This empire could become the wealthiest and most powerful in ancient history. But there's one big problem. All this assumes. Alexander lives long enough. In real history, he died at 32. If he wanted to conquer China, he needed to live to at least 50 or 60, and his empire needed talented heirs to continue. This is the biggest risk, not war, not geography, but time. Humans have limited lifespans, and empires can't be built in one person's lifetime. Act 3. Option 2, the sea route, or creative suicide. All right, suppose Alexander thinks, walking through desert sounds too tiring, 20 years, no way. I'll take a ship, 5 or 6 years tops. This is when I have to say, Alexander, don't do that. Please listen to me. But suppose he insists, let's see what happens, and I'll explain why this is the worst idea in warfare history. The theoretical route from Persian ports, Hormuz or Persian Gulf, sail along India's coast, around the Bay of Bengal, through the Malacca Strait, up the East China Sea, then land in Lingnan, modern Guangdong or northern Vietnam. Total distance, about 8,000 to 9,000 nautical miles, 15,000 kilometers. Doesn't sound too far, right? With modern ships going 15 knots per hour, just 25 days. But this is 320 BC. Maritime technology? Terrible. No, not terrible. So terrible it should be illegal. Problem 1, Alexander's ships suck. Let's talk about Greco-Persian maritime technology at this time. Available ship types: trireme, Greece's main warship. 3 tiers of oars, 170 rowers, 35 meters long. Sounds impressive? Problems: designed for combat, not long-distance transport, could only carry minimal provisions, 3 to 5 days. Had to dock every night so crew could rest and get water. Couldn't sail in storms. Maximum speed, 5 knots per hour, 8 kilometers per hour, when rowing full force, but only sustainable for a few hours. Merchant ship, wider, slower, could carry provisions for 15 to 30 days, but still had to stay coastal. If sailing on open sea without seeing land, crew would panic because they didn't know where they were. No compass. The compass was invented in China during the Han Dynasty, around 200 BC, and only reached the West after 1200 AD. In 320 BC, how did they navigate? Look at the sun during day, North Star at night. If it's cloudy, good luck. Don't understand monsoons. Indians and Arabs later discovered monsoons, seasonal winds that could carry ships from India to Africa or vice versa. But this knowledge was only recorded in the 1st century AD in the periplus of the Erythraean Sea. In 320 BC, nobody knew. Sailors went by experience, stay coastal, pray for favorable winds. No accurate maps. Greek maps of the Indian Ocean during Alexander's time? Basically blank. They knew about India because Alexander had just fought there. But what's east of India? Nobody knew. Could be land, could be endless ocean, could be the edge of the world where ships would fall off. Crew experience. Greek and Persian sailors only knew the Mediterranean, an enclosed, calm sea with many islands to rest at. The Indian Ocean. Open sea, big waves, tropical storms. No islands to rest at for thousands of kilometers. They'd be scared to death. Historical evidence of how terrible maritime travel was. When Alexander left India for Persia in 325 BC, he divided his forces into 3 groups. Group 1 marched west along the coast under Craterus, through Kandahar, relatively safe. Group 2 marched along the southern coast under Alexander, through Gadrosia Desert, Pakistan, Iran, lost 75% of troops due to no water and food. Group 3 sailed by ship along the coast under Nearchus with the fleet, had to stay close to shore, dock every night. Nearchus later wrote memoirs, lost but quoted by Arrian, about this horrific journey. Constantly lacking fresh water because they docked at desolate places with no water sources. Encountered giant fish, possibly humpback whales, that terrified sailors who thought they were monsters. Storms nearly capsized ships multiple times, lost about 30% of ships and men, and that was just sailing along the Persian-Indian coast, 2,000 kilometers, close to shore, able to dock daily, not crossing 8,000 nautical miles of Indian Ocean. So if Alexander insists on taking the sea route to China, what would happen? Stage 1. From Persia to India, 2,000 kilometers. This is the only doable part because Nearchus already did it. Alexander could sail along the Makran coast, Pakistan, dock at Indian ports like Babarikam, modern Karachi. Time, 3 to 4 months if everything goes smoothly. Loss rate, 30%. Stage 2, from India to Malacca Strait, 4,000 kilometers. This is when everything becomes insane. From eastern India, across the Bay of Bengal, there are no major islands for thousands of kilometers, except Sri Lanka. Sailors would have to sail forever without seeing land. They'd think they were lost or heading to the edge of the world. Moreover, the Bay of Bengal has tropical storms from May to November. Tropical storms can reach wind speeds of 200 kilometers per hour. Small Greek wooden ships would be torn apart like paper. Suppose they luckily avoided storms and reached the Burma/Bangladesh coast. But this is a desolate coast, no ports, no cities, just jungle and swamps, nowhere to buy provisions, no clean, fresh water. River water is disease-ridden. If they continue, they must pass through the Malacca Strait, the strait between Malaysia and Indonesia. This place has pirates existed since ancient times. Strong currents, many small islands making navigation difficult. And most importantly, Greek sailors had never heard of this place. Survival rate through this stage, 10%, and I'm being optimistic. Stage 3. From Malacca Strait to Lingnan, 3,000 kilometers. Suppose a miracle happens and a few ships survive. Now they must sail from Southeast Asia up the East China Sea. This is a sea area that even Chinese sailors, the best in Asia at maritime navigation, were wary of. The South China Sea has Pacific typhoons stronger than Indian Ocean storms, underwater coral reefs, Spratly, Paracel. Ships sink without needing storms, complex ocean currents, unpredictably changing monsoon winds. Moreover, the crew is now exhausted after 2 years at sea. They lack vitamin C, scurvy, teeth falling out, skin ulcers, have malaria, dysentery, and lost morale. Many will go insane or commit suicide. Overall survival rate from Persia to Lingnan, less than 5%. That means, if Alexander started with 10,000 men on 100 ships, he'd arrive in Lingnan with 500 men on 5 ships. 500 men. To conquer China. See the problem? But suppose a miracle happens. Suppose the gods took pity on Alexander. Suppose he's the luckiest person in history. He survives. He reaches Guangdong or Jiaozhi port with 500 men. Now where is he? He's at the extreme south of China. This place in 320 BC was what? Lingnan during warring states. This wasn't territory of any of the 7 powers. This was land of the Baiyue, dozens of Vietnamese Hmong tribes scattered about. They had no centralized state, no large armies. They lived on wet rice, farming, fishing, and hunting in forests. For Alexander, this is good news. He could easily defeat these tribes, seize a piece of coastal land, and establish Alexandria Sinica, a Greek colony in East Asia. He could turn this place into a naval base, a trading port, a gathering place for reinforcements from the west, if anyone was crazy enough to follow this death route. But the problem is, then what? Between Lingnan and the Central Plains, where Qin, Zhao, and Chu existed, was what? Jungle. Mountains, disease. From Guangdong to the Central Plains. The distance from Guangdong to Hubei, center of Chu state, is about 1,000 kilometers. Doesn't sound far, but this is 1,000 kilometers through. Terrain. The Nanling mountain range, mountains 1 to 2,000 meters high, covered in tropical rainforest. Countless rivers and streams must cross innumerable small rivers, no bridges, no roads, seriously, no roads, only trails through the forest that the Baiyue people used. Climated temperature 35 to 40 degrees Celsius with 90% humidity. Rain from April to September. Everything wet, moldy, and ruined. No clear dry season like Central Asia. Diseases, malaria, the #1 killer, no cure in ancient times, dysentery from dirty water and contaminated food, dengue fever, parasites from leeches, ticks, and dirty water, venomous snakes, scorpions, centipedes. Macedonian troops, accustomed to the cool, dry Mediterranean climate, now must march through tropical rainforest at 40 degrees. They wear bronze armor, carry heavy shields, and long spears. Within a few days, they'd be exhausted. Within a few weeks, half would have malaria. Within a few months, 80% would be dead. This isn't exaggeration. History proves it. When Qin Shi Huang attacked Lingnan in 214 BC, With 500,000 troops, he lost at least 200,000 to disease and guerrilla attacks by the Vietnamese. And that was Chinese troops accustomed to Asian climate. Alexander with 500 exhausted Macedonians? No chance. But suppose he tries anyways. Suppose Alexander crosses the forest. He reaches Chu's border. Now he must face Chu, the largest superpower of the Warring States period. Chu had population of 15 to 20 million people, army of 500,000 to 600,000, area equal to half of China. Own culture and language, they considered themselves a separate civilization, not part of Huaxia. Alexander with how many men left? 100? 50? After losing 80% to malaria? This isn't a battle anymore. This is death. Sea route conclusion. Chance of reaching China. 5% chance of surviving in Lingnan, 20% chance of crossing forests to central plains, near 0 chance of defeating Chu, 0 chance of unifying China, absolute 0. The sea route isn't a plan. This is fantasy. This is how an insane person thinks about strategy. If Alexander took the sea route, the only thing he could accomplish is creating a small colony in Guangdong, living a few years, then being killed by disease or Vietnamese. Nobody in the West would know what happened to him. He'd disappear into history like Amelia Earhart. And that's why the sea route is the worst idea. Act 4. Comparing the two options. If we put both routes on the scale, overland route. Difficult? Yes. Long? Yes. 20 to 30 years. Mortality rate? High, 50%. But feasible? Yes. Success probability? 20%. Sea route? Difficult, extremely. Long, shorter if you survive. Mortality rate? Extremely high, 95%. Feasible? Almost no. Success probability? Near 0, which would I choose? Overland, without thinking. At least you die on solid ground instead of drowning in the Indian Ocean.